Over to you, Akash.
Thank you. Thank you. A very good evening to everyone. Hi, my name is Akash. I welcome you all today to the 11th monthly online guest lecture organized by the research scholars of the School of Sanskrit, Philosophy and Indic Studies at Goa University. Our speaker and guest for today is Dr. Maurice Hamington, Professor of Philosophy and affiliated faculty at woman gender and sexuality studies at Portland State University, Oregon, USA. And the talk is titled Embodied Care, Maurice Merleau-Ponty and Feminist Care Ethics. I now request, before we begin, I would like to inform all the attendees that the event, along with the contents in the chat box, is being recorded. All the participants are requested to keep their microphones on mute throughout the lecture. The lecture will go on for about 60 minutes, after which there will be a question answer session. I would now request Ms. Dipanki to please begin with the welcome address.
Thank you, Akash. Good evening, everyone present here with warm greetings. It gives me a great pleasure to extend a warm welcome on behalf of Sanskrit Philosophy and Indic Studies. We are proud to announce that today we have a great personality with us, Dr. Maurice Hamington. I welcome Dr. Hamington for our today's session. Dr. Maurice Hamington is a professor of philosophy and affiliated faculty in Women, Gender and Sexuality Studies at Portland State University, Oregon, USA. He is a care ethicist interested in both the theory application of care. Dr. Hamington has authored or edited several books, including Care Ethics, Religion and Spiritual Tradition, with Angeva Nistelrooy and Maureen Sanders Stout. Care Ethics in the Age of Precarity with Michael Flava. Care Ethics and Poetry, authored with C. Rosenau. Care Ethics and Political Theory with Daniel Engster. Applying Care Ethics to Business with Maureen Sanders Stout. Socializing Care with Dorothy C. Miller and Embodied Care. He is currently working on the Oxford Handbook Jane Addams with Patricia Sale and Joseph Soiteres. Dr. Hamington is currently a Fulbright specialist. We welcome you again, Dr. Maurice Hamington. It's a privilege to have you here. We also welcome and thank Professor Kosi, Dean of Sanskrit Philosophy and Indic Studies at Goa University, and other faculty members of our school. We also welcome all research scholars as well as all the participants from and outside of Goa University. Thank you. I'm back to Akash.
Thank you, Dipanki. I would now request Dr. Maurice Hamington to begin with the presentation.
Very good. Okay, thank you. I'm going to share my screen. Let's see. All right. Do you see, I can't see it anymore. So can you see my screen?
Yes, Professor, it's visible.
Very good. Okay. Well, thank you for that introduction to Dipanki. And I would like to thank Dr. Koshi Tharakan and Vasudha Sawaikar and Vidya Mary George for their gracious invitation and all their hard work in setting up this presentation. It is an honor to speak to this wonderful academic community, and the more I hear about it, the more honored I am to be here. I like to start my presentation with a little bit of a land acknowledgement. And one of the things we'll talk about briefly is standpoint theory in the talk. And I think it's important to kind of acknowledge where we're from and the privileges that we have. So my university, Portland State University, is located in the heart of downtown Portland, Oregon, in Multnomah County in the United States. And I want to honor the indigenous people whose tradition and ancestral homelands my university stands on. These native peoples include the Multnomah, the Cathlamet, the Clackamas, the Tumwater, the Watlala bands of the Chinook, the Tualatin Kalapuya, and many other indigenous nations of the Columbia River. In the spirit of care, I think it's important to acknowledge the ancestors of this place and to recognize that I'm here because of the sacrifices forced upon them. In remembering these communities, I honor their legacy, their lives, and their descendants, including those struggling today. We are all very privileged to be in academia, and that, privilege means that we stand on the shoulders of others, and sometimes that means kind of harm and oppression to others. And so I want to humbly acknowledge the standpoint from which I come. So the talk is Embodied Care, Maurice Merleau-Ponty and Feminist Care Ethics. And I already got a wonderful introduction, but there I am. I think you heard all of this. These are just a few of the projects I have been involved in. And I've been exploring feminist care ethics for 25 years. I've been in higher education for almost 40 years. It just means I'm old. But you can, you're welcome to reach out to me. I work with graduate students all over the world. Just last Friday, I was on a PhD dissertation jury for somebody working on care ethics and artificial intelligence in Spain. And so I had to zoom into them in Spain. So if you ever want to reach out to me, that email is for your use. And if I can be helpful in your research or your projects, I am happy to do so. Today's talk brings together two streams of thought. And one is Merleau-Ponty's phenomenology of the body, and the other is feminist care ethics. And both of them are important fields, and we're going to bring them together. The talk itself, I'm going to do a brief introduction to Merleau-Ponty, and I'm going to focus in on his phenomenology of the body. And then I'm going to do a brief introduction to feminist care ethics. I'm going to talk about feminist care ethics as embodied and performative, and I'll explain what those words mean. And then I'm going to start addressing what good care is, and I argue that it consists of humble inquiry, inclusive connection, and responsive action, and I'll go into those. And then at the end, I'll just reiterate why this is so important, and we need to build a more caring society. And I'm going to talk about the ideas of commitment and ethos. So in looking at this outline, really the first two big bullets are kind of existing material that's out there, and then the last three bullets is really more of my own work and what I'm writing right now. Right now I'm writing a book on a care revolution, and it's going to address issues of commitment and ethos. Okay, so first I want to tell a couple of stories. The first is in the 2014 film Dancing in Jaffa. It presents an interesting kind of care study from somebody interested in issues of embodiment. The movie reflects the culmination of the life of the work of Pierre Dulain, an internationally recognized ballroom dancer. Dulain was born in Jaffa, Palestine, but spent most of his life in England and in the United States. He co-founded the American Ballroom Theater Company in 1984, and then in 1994, he helped found the education arm of his organization known as Dancing Classrooms. The organization frames its mission in terms of developing life skills, including respect for individuals through ballroom dancing, programs in elementary and middle schools. Dancing Classrooms has over 500 schools internationally use their programs. There's been a lot of research supporting the fact that Dancing Classrooms improves students' perception of social support, diversity, self-sufficiency, and there's also lots of anecdotal evidence to support that. Dancing in Jaffa is an extension of Dulain's vision for Dancing Classrooms. In the film, Dulain returns to the town of his birth, which is now torn by political realities of the war between the Israelis and the Palestinians. He works with 10-year-olds who have inherited the warring Israeli and Palestinian stereotypes and mistrust. Over time and through hard work, the intimacy, the physicality, the risk of ballroom dancing brings down the barriers, and the students and teachers, say as much explicitly. The result is not some kind of glorious triumph of meeting some kind of imminent need, as much as it is a glimpse of what could be the opportunity if we empathetically and imaginatively made inroads to understanding one another's lives. In this way, Dulain helps establish new habits, and that's a term we're going to talk about, using the affectations associated with shared aesthetic endeavor in the dance. It's a kind of a rehearsal, a kind of performance, not with the intention of turning these 10-year-olds into champion dancers, but with the aim of improving relationships through exercising natural capacities. A positive outcome is not just lessons about the common humanity of Palestinians and Israelis, but also the imaginative and cognitive habits of opening the door to understanding people who are othered, who are different. Dancing becomes a means of learning ethics in a method other than acquiring propositional knowledge or rules or calculating utility. Ballroom dancing is the vehicle for meaningful interaction that is further elevated through attentiveness. So, I picked that story because of its embodiedness, which we will, of course, discuss in regards to Merleau-Ponty. But I have one more story. A second story is about this dance troupe called Fevered Sheep in London. And since 2015, it has offered performances called Men and Girls Dance. The show pairs male professional dancers with non-professional dancing girls between the age of 9 and 12, challenging a kind of social taboo, because there's always this belief that men are predatory, and so they can't be playful and have fun with young girls, because of the dangers there. And so the Fevered Sleep's approach resists presenting either the girls or the men as victims of somewhat stereotype and oppressive heteronormative structures. Instead, Men and Girls Dance performs images of interdependence and cooperation. In these, in the opening moments, we observe two groups of dancers beginning to work collaboratively together, collectively absorbed in the process that is unfolding in the world of media. And if you see that picture there, they have newspapers around the stage to kind of represent social narrative, the social, taboo of men, again, being playful with girls. But over time, they, trust emerges. They begin to be really playful with one another. The power dynamics between the dancers and the girls is in constant flux, shifting as one takes the lead or then the other takes the lead. And the performance is one that ends up being very careful. In the play, there's an unspoken caring knowledge that is acquired and performed in various ways. There are repeated moments of observation and description of what's going on. And there's a kind of a mutual sense of engagement, attentiveness, and trust. Caring emerges as an embodied knowledge of the other, but also as a sense of openness and a recognition of shared humanity and a shared sense of vulnerability. So we engage in embodied performances all the time, not just on stage. And I think the work of Merleau-Ponty is a great way to get into that. So I'll start with the first part of the presentation. I just want to, I know that many of you have studied Merleau-Ponty already and are familiar with his work, but just to make sure that we're all together on this, I'm just going to give a brief overview. So he was both a philosopher and a public intellectual. He was writing articles and in the public eye and not just working in universities. He was influenced by who is considered the father of modern phenomenology, Edmund Husserl. And he was in good company because his colleagues included Jean-Paul Sartre, Simone de Beauvoir, and Simone Weil. He authored many significant works of phenomenology, but he's most well remembered for his work on the body and in phenomenology. So, Husserl, argued for this way of kind of peeling back experience and just trying to get at what's actually going on. And Merleau-Ponty took that phenomenology and applied it to try to understand what's going on in the body. He died much too young, and it would have been exciting to see where his scholarship and where his mind would have taken him. His unfinished manuscript, The Visible and the Invisible, which was published posthumously, contains lots of intriguing ideas. So let's focus in a little bit more on his work on the body. A key term for him is habits. He explicitly says our body is our means for having a world. And that sounds kind of common sense and maybe, a little too obvious. But remember, in the field of philosophy, particularly Western philosophy, the body is neglected and overlooked and, for the most part, denigrated. Descartes said you can't really trust the body, right? So here he is kind of turning philosophy on its head a little bit and saying, look, you don't have any of that rationality. You don't have any of that intellectualism without the body. And so what seems like an obvious idea was actually quite a pushback against Western philosophy. So he has this rich idea of habit. The acquisition of habit as a rearrangement and renewal for the corporal scheme presents great difficulties to traditional philosophies, which are always inclined to conceive synthesis as intellectual synthesis. And so he's saying that the body is involved in it. For For Merleau-Ponty, habits, sometimes we like to think about bad habits or, people having habits or as just kind of rote repetitions of things. But he had this more robust understanding of habits as these open-ended structures that are both mental and physical. And we can influence those habits through intention and through effort. The body has capacities, but our habits allow us to harness some of those capacities. And we'll see how some of those habits operate as we look at these other three concepts that he brings up. By the way, John Dewey, the American pragmatist philosopher, also had this kind of rich notion of habits that kind of parallels Merleau-Ponty. But in the next few slides, I'm going to focus in on perception, figure background phenomena, and the flesh as these important aspects of the body, particularly as we think about moving to a concept of embodied care, which we'll get to later. But these become very important concepts. All right, so his notion of perception is, everything comes through perception. If we're going to say our body is our way of having a world, well, then our senses are our way of bringing that world in and interacting with that world. And this emphasis on perception is really important as we think about epistemology, because he challenges the classic analytic epistemological formula of X knows P, because in the traditional way of thinking of X knows P as a kind of formula where X and P are interchangeable, he's saying, wait a second, the knower matters. The perceptions matter. How the knower comes to know matters. And so it's the knower is not interchangeable. It's not simply a kind of knowledge acquisition. You have a knower who is engaged through perception in the creation of knowledge. He said, whenever I try to understand myself, the whole fabric of the perceptible world comes too, and with it comes the others who are caught in it. So the words like fabric start to, these are kind of relational terms, interconnected kinds of terms. And I want to repeat that his emphasis on the body is not is not to eschew the significance of rationality, but he thinks more of like a mind-body where the two are, inexorably mixed together, working together. And, as in that quote there, he's also hinting at the fact that we are also ontologically interconnected. And I'll get more in that in a little bit. But these kinds of entanglements hint at a kind of caring inquiry. So he says the perceived world is the always presupposed foundation of all rationality, all value, and all existence. So he's saying perception, and that was the name of his book, right? The primacy of perception. Perception comes first for Merleau-Ponty. Another one of his important concepts in a kind of habit that we can attend to. We have it anyway, but we can attend to it and maybe improve upon it. And it's also a habit that's absolutely essential for care, is the figure background phenomenon. And this is our body's way of being able to focus on things right now. And so we can foreground certain things and put other things in the background. Our body does this and our perception does this, both. So, you know, right now, you may be focusing on my presentation and what I have to say. Maybe you're struggling with the focusing because maybe you're not interested, or it's not interesting. But you focus on it and you put other things in the background because you're focusing on the presentation. Imagine if our bodies couldn't do that. If all stimuli was equal, then we wouldn't be able, you know, to discern. We wouldn't be able to make sense of our world because we could never understand anything very deeply because there would be all this stimuli. Also, and you know, and relatedly so, our bodies naturally focus on you know, on things. When you listen to a presentation, you don't have to think about breathing or digesting or pumping blood through your body. Your body faces into the background and you're able to concentrate on something and focus on it. This is extremely important in terms of caring, because when we care for somebody, we need to be able to focus our attention, and that's a habit that we can improve upon and get better at in terms of attending to others and foregrounding people at certain moments. There's an anecdote Merleau-Ponty talks about how whenever anybody walks into a room and you're there, your eyes immediately go to that person because we have habituated that, but also we have this capacity to do that. And we know that people bring more meaning into the situation than other things. And so we're able to kind of focus on that. So that's one habit. And then finally, I want to talk about the notion of the flesh. And this is a little bit fuzzy and some, you know, to get one's mind around. But when Merleau-Ponty talks about the flesh, he's not just talking about skin. He is talking about a kind of intercorporeal radiant that goes out. So I am of flesh and you are of flesh. And as such, we have something in common, and that is the flesh. And so even if I don't know you, even if I can't speak your language or I don't understand your culture or your upbringing, we immediately have a connection in the body, in the flesh. He puts it this way, fictions which I might people my desert offspring of my spirit and forever unactualized possibilities, but my twins or flesh of my flesh. They're twins of you know, you're saying other people are twins of myself. And so we can always have that that connection. I'll get back to this idea that we're also both subject and object, and I think the notion of the flesh helps us in that understanding. So he says the factual presence of other bodies could not produce itself, produce thought or the idea of its seed were it not in my own body. Thought is a relationship with oneself and with the world, as well as a relationship with the other. So, yeah, so I think all of caring comes from the body and is metaphorically understood through the body. Now we can have complex machinations around the ideas of caring and have complex ways of addressing caring, but it all begins with foundational work how caring is understood in our body. Our bodies provide the imaginative metaphorical thinking for all of our care. Finally, I want to mention a concept pointed out by the scholar Anya Daly and others, and that's the idea of the reversibility thesis. And in the reversibility thesis, that idea in the flesh that we are both touching and touched, right? And we can touch our own skin, and we are both the, you know, the active and the passive. We're the receiver, you know, of that touch, both subject and object. Merleau-Ponty addresses the chiasm between those experiences of touching, and that your mind has to flip back and forth between the two, but we can accomplish both. And the body unifies our experience and makes sense of that perception experience. And in this kind of reversibility, Anya Daly proposes this notion of identity indifference. So I recognize that you're a different person. You're not me. And yet you are something like me. You are something of me. There is a connection. Some philosophers have traditionally argued that, you know, human understanding is incommensurable. We can't understand, we will never understand each other. And there's some truth to that, but Merleau-Ponty says, but there's always a baseline understanding, and that is, you know, in the body. It is precisely my body that perceives the body of another and discovers in that other body miraculous prolongation of my own intentions, a familiar way of dealing with the world. If, you know, again, if I don't speak your language, if I don't understand you, and you fall and hit your head, I don't have to wonder whether you enjoyed that or if it, you know, what it felt like. I know what it felt like because I have a body, and I know what gravity feels like, and what that kind of you know, violation feels like. So it's this is this complex thinking when it comes to the body. Okay, and then finally, he has this notion, he again talks about in the visible and the invisible. There's so many little tidbits in that book. He addresses something called the hyperdialectic. So you're probably familiar with Hegelian dialectic, a kind of binary getting at the truth. Merleau-Ponty argues for a hyperdialectic. He says it's more than just two. It's really a complex being in the world, where you bring lots of relationships to bear in trying to get at the truth. And Anya Daly and others take the hyperdialectic and the reversibility thesis and argue that there is a deep relational ontology in Merleau-Ponty, that, you know, we are really interconnected at a fundamental level. This isn't just saying that we are social beings. This is more than that. This is going deep to the heart of who we are. And so she argues that we have a primary empathy because of that we have within us a kind of empathy because we are always interconnected with one another. All right, I'm going to turn now to I'm going to turn to feminist care ethics and do a little explanation about that before bringing Merleau-Ponty back into the discussion. So feminist care ethics is a kind of radical way of thinking about morality. First of all, taking a step back and just thinking about what care is. Care is an existential imperative. We need care. All of us need care. We wouldn't survive. As you're well aware, human babies are fairly helpless and would not survive without somebody taking care of them. But it's not just babies. We need each other all through our lives. And care sustains humanity, and it always has. The compassion and cooperation are just as important as competition. We tend to think more about competition in the human story, but care and compassion does. And the most quoted definition of care is offered by Joan Tronto. And it is, and that's a picture of her there. On the most general level, we suggest that caring be viewed as a species activity that includes everything that we do to maintain, continue, and repair our world so that we can live in it as well as possible. That includes our bodies, ourselves, and our environment, all of which we seek to interweave in a complex life-sustaining web. So that's very general. It's very general. And so again, it's kind of, this is one of those things that it kind of seems obvious, but care was ignored by Western moral philosophers throughout most of history. We can find different pockets where we can see resonance with it, but it was kind of it's been historically devalued. So care ethics recenters morality around relationships. Relationships is the currency, or are the currency of morality. If you think of Kantian ethics and you think of duties and rules, if you can think of virtue theory, you can talk about utilitarianism, but care ethics focuses more on relationships and less on, it has normative implications, but it's less concerned with adjudicating moral quandaries. In care ethics, emotion and context are critical. Standpoint matters. Emotions aren't negated. They are seen as part and parcel of what it is to be human and to be connected. It has epistemological and ontological dimensions as well as moral ones. The care, when you care about somebody, knowledge is kind of like the other side of the coin. The more you care about somebody, the more you want to know about them. The more you know about somebody, the more there is the possibility that you will care about them. It's not always the case. Anything with human beings isn't 100%, but it raises, it raises that possibility. Something I'll argue for later is that it's a kind of process morality, and that it emphasizes means, methods, and doesn't fall too strongly on the means ends distinction. All right, so one thing to be clear upon is that care ethics was born from women's experience, but it is not a women's morality. And what I mean by that is, I said it was, it'd been overlooked throughout the history of Western moral philosophy. And why was it overlooked? Because care was the realm of women, taking care of children, taking care of the family, and it wasn't seen as important as rational approaches to things that we saw in classic philosophy. The labor of care is devalued, and thinking about care was devalued. And so it's very much a gendered concept, and that's contributed to it. But I want to make it clear that even though women's experience, kind of prompted it, and feminist theorists ran with the idea and developed it, it is not an essentialist comment. This is not to say that men cannot care. Of course, men can care. And there can be women who, act in uncaring ways. That's not the point of this. But somebody had to take women's experience and value it first in order for us to think about these. So today, care ethics has become a critical part of feminist philosophy, but it wasn't really named until 1982 by Carol Gilligan, pictured there in her book In a Different Voice. And she's a psychologist. She didn't really do a lot of the philosophical work on it, but it has emerged and blossomed. Now, care ethics is kind of a worldwide phenomenon that crosses lots of different disciplines. Philosophers like Nell Noddings and Eva Feder-Kate have advanced the care thinking. You already saw Joan Tronto. She's a political theorist, political philosopher. And it's gone into many different fields. It's actually, this is kind of the golden age of care ethics because we're seeing it emerge in so many places. In anthropology, business ethics, disability studies, education, gender and sexuality studies, geography. There's been great work on geography and care ethics, healthcare, history, law, literature, political science, sociology, social work, theater, and more. When I tell somebody off the street that I work on care ethics, they usually think I work on healthcare ethics. They always make that kind of association. And of course, you can talk about care in that way, but so many more ways. The three covers of the book I have down there, those are all written in 2021 or 2022 books. Worlds of Care is an anthropological work, look at masculinity and care and disability. Trans care looks at those who are non-heteronormative and their identity and care. And performing care is about socially engaged performance. Those three different fields. I told you last week I was involved with that student who's working on artificial intelligence and care, and I actually went to a seminar at Stanford where I presented on care for people working on technology, asking the question, can AI care? Care has kind of blossomed from its original form, and it is now kind of impossible to keep up with all the literature in it. Now I'd like to bring it back together and talk a little bit about embodied care, getting back to the body and thinking about care ethics. So as we said before, the body is usually not considered in Western philosophy very much. And actually, feminist care theorists largely ignored the role of the body as well at first. And there actually hasn't been too much in the literature. But back in 2004, I wrote this book called Embodied Care. And in it, I said that embodied care is an approach to personal and social morality that shifts ethical considerations to context, relationships, and affective knowledge in a manner that can only be fully understood if it is embodied and performative dimension is recognized. Care is committed to the flourishing and growth of individuals, yet acknowledges our interconnectedness and interdependence. So the Merleau-Ponty's phenomenology means if, as he said, if our body is our means for having a world, then our body is also our means for experiencing and delivering care. The genesis of all care begins with the body, and we use our habits of imagination. So we structure things to be more caring, and then empathy can be considered a kind of habit, an imaginative habit of care. So we all have the capacity for empathy, but we can also attend to that skill, that habit, and improve it. Just as if you want to become a better, if you want to become a better football player, you practice and you attend to it. Maybe you even, film yourself and study it and do better at it. The same can be true about our body and caring and understanding other people. So the one advantage we have as human beings, as we saw before, is that we can be both subject and object. We perform acts of care, and we can observe ourselves and try to improve at it. So this is an example of living the reflective life, living the philosopher's life of the examined life, except thinking about it in these holistic terms of both body and mind and caring. In terms of, I want to mention feminist standpoint knowledge. Feminist standpoint suggests that all knowledge is perspectival, and our situatedness influences our understanding of the world, where we stand in the world, our positionality, socially, economically, politically, culturally, all those kinds of ways. Well, if you think about it, human corporality is the ultimate individual standpoint. I am the only one in this body. That's it. I'm living in this discrete space, and yet I share flesh, and I can imaginatively empathize with others if I allow myself to do it. The task of care ethics, the struggle, what people write about all the time is how to widen the circle of care. How do we care for more unfamiliar and distant others? Nell Noddings describes, she makes this distinction in her writing between what she calls natural caring, the caring we have for our family and friends, and ethical caring, the caring that we have for people we are less familiar with, the strangers, the others. And, how do we get from one to the other? How do we get ourselves past the division, the violence, the prejudice, and, to care for those others? And, this is what a lot of political theorists have been struggling with. Okay. So if we have a phenomenology of the body, then there is an aesthetic to care. There is, an action in the world. There is something to see. There can be beautiful acts, of care. Here, I'm not using the word performance in the pejorative way. Sometimes people say, well, they're just putting on a performance. They don't really mean it. They're putting on a performance. Here, I'm using it more of an acknowledgement of our aesthetic experience. This that we perform things, we do things. Our actions are out there. They're seen and they're experienced. We are both the performer and the audience for ourselves. And in this way, I've come to really, even though I'm an ethicist, and I wasn't trained in aesthetics, I've gained an appreciation for aesthetics. And I think we can learn a lot from those in actually in theater and dramaturgy that we can apply to build our habits of care. And I'm interested in dramaturgy, not to make, again, great actors and actresses, much like in Delane didn't want to make great ballroom dancers. I'm more interested in creating the habits of care, which is what he wanted to do, that we could care, that we could bring out. And so, I once taught a philosophy class about the phenomenology, of the body and caring, where I had my students engage in acting, and they had to inhabit other characters to try to better understand them, and kind of get into who they are. and then process that, reflect on it. That's the philosophical part. Debrief the experience of the acting so that we could understand others better. And so performance is one way, but also improvisation, improv performance. What is improvisation? It's having skills that you can bring to a situation. If you think about it, people who do improvisational work still have to practice improvisation, which sounds like a kind of contradiction in terms, but what they're doing is practicing the skills, not the answers. And that's what caring is. It's practicing the skills and not necessarily knowing what the answers are. Most of moral philosophy offers answers, gives you formulas for it. Care says, I don't know what the answers are exactly. I know we need to care, and I need to have good skills, good methods in order to get it. And that's why I think of it as a process morality. Care is really a kind of pursuit of the good in that respect. Okay, now I want to talk a little bit about good care. This is not in the literature so much. This is what I'm writing about now, and thinking about care as a process morality. And in doing so, I think thinking about good care is almost as important as thinking about what the definition of care is. So care ethics is a non-ideal theory. And so it's not trying to create an ideal world, but it has a moral, it's wrapped in a moral ideal, which is, again, sounds contradictory. The value is care. And because it's a process morality, we want to get better at caring, but there is no perfect care. I will never be a perfect caregiver. It's unobtainable, but I can always get better, and one can improve their caring practices and habits. And so I argue that there are three components to good or effective care. One, humble inquiry; two, inclusive connection; and three, responsive action. And here's what I mean by that. As I said before, all of care hinges upon knowledge. The more I know about somebody, the better I can care for them. And the more knowledge I bring to the table, the more I care for it. So let's use a quick example of a doctor. A doctor can be very skilled, bring lots of knowledge of how to treat the body. And yet, in order for the patient to feel cared for, there needs to be some humble inquiry where the person really asks questions and really tries to understand. I'm sure you have had experiences where you've worked with professionals who may be good at what they do, but they didn't have any time for you. They didn't listen to you. And so even though they may be very skilled, you didn't feel cared for. The care wasn't there. But humble inquiry, and this doesn't mean that you don't have self-confidence. I'm not saying that. The humility is in really coming to the relationship without prejudice, without stereotypes in your head, without predetermined answers, but you really want to find out about the other person. You want to ask about them. You want to get to know them better in an earnest way. And that's going to help you, whether you're a doctor or a teacher or anything. That humble inquiry can help. And then inclusive connection. How are we going to expand the circle of care? Good care means that we connect with people. We see that what Merleau-Ponty talks about the flesh. We realize that the other person resonates with me. It's in my body, that other person. But we want to be inclusive about it. It's so easy to be exclusive about it, right? And again, focus on the familiar others and not unfamiliar others. Remembering we're coming from a particular standpoint and we want to make connections with people in other standpoints. And so to be inclusive about it. And then the final thing is responsive action. Responsiveness is a very important word in care ethics because responding means that you're meeting somebody else's needs where they're at. And you're not just, treating everybody the same. You're not a doctor who says, take 2 aspirin and call me in the morning or whatever. It's responsive. You're responding to that knowledge that you gain for them. These 3 things don't go in any particular order, and some may occur more than others, but I think these things are necessary for there to be good care. That doesn't mean that, care exists on a continuum. There isn't just a binary bad care, good care. It exists on a continuum. And superficial acts of care, like when somebody tells me to have a nice day, I think that's very nice. It's fine. But the deeper kind of care comes, in this kind of connection with the other. So when I think that care is the ultimate moral value, I said it's what we need to sustain ourselves, and so we should value it highly. And I think that there should be a commitment to care, a dedication and valuing that helps create an abiding kind of care. I like the word commitment because it means that I have made this choice. There's something of me, as opposed to it being a rule from the outside, a commitment to care. And if I want to use Kantian language, I think care should be the categorical commitment, and there are other commitments are kind of subordinate to it that go along with it. And I think, 3 of those are the humble inquiry, inclusive connection, responsive action that I described as good care. I think if I'm going to say I want to be a moral person, that means I should commit to care. And then going along with those is this idea of humble inquiry, inclusive connection, and responsive action. Finally, I want to talk about a care ethos. This, again, is not in the literature. This is something I'm trying to work out. And here I'm using the modern understanding of ethos. This is not the Aristotelian notion of ethos. The modern use of ethos, and there's a lot of theory that's using this term, means an indefinite moral commitment, a co-created moral identity. So there's this sense that you and others get involved in creating this ethos. It's a very relational kind of idea. And it integrates emotional, visceral, and rational commitment. So an ethos isn't simply a rational argument. Sometimes an ethos is a felt kind of experience. It's a kind of spirituality. And the reason I think ethos is an important concept for care is that it can help us resist the gamification. Sometimes we take, if we're just really rule-based, sometimes we play with the rules so we can make it work out for ourselves. We play games with the rules. And I've written articles like business is not a game, politics is not a game. They're too important to be games. But sometimes morality is treated like a game. And if you have a spirit of care, then you can help overcome some of that. I think this is an important corollary to the work that our political theorists are doing with care ethics, because people like Joan Tronto and Dan Engster, they've done great work on political ideas, policies, practices that should be in society and put into place. But I think the corollary to that is a spirit of care. So, for example, in the United States, we've passed many civil rights laws, and yet we still have rampant racism in the United States. And the laws aren't enough. Rights aren't enough. I'm completely for progressive laws and rights on behalf of the oppressed. But to go along with it, there needs to be a commitment, a spirit of care in the general population to help with that. So it's kind of a cultural change, and I think it's important to add that. So my final words is why we need a care revolution now, and why would we want a more caring society. I think that the notion of embodied care is particularly needed today. The world is dominated by neoliberal narratives. Neoliberalism stresses market-based solutions, productivity, kind of radical freedom, and self-interest. And many people have studied this idea and this term, but the neoliberal answers are failing us. We're failing our environment. We're failing so many people in the world, and we need different kinds of answers. And I think embodied care can help do that. Here's a very recent book by Gary Gersel. He says, neoliberalism is a creed that calls explicitly for unleashing capitalism's power. It is a creed that prizes free trade and free movement of capital, goods, and people. It celebrates deregulation as an economic good that results when governments can no longer interfere with the operation of markets. Another theorist of care talks about how neoliberalism has become a rubric of veridiction, of truth-telling, like it is the truth. And it's insidious because it seeps into our lives and we all become neoliberals at some level. And I think care can be a kind of antidote to it. Life is fundamentally precious. Humans have evolved to make life less precarious. I mean, life is fundamentally precarious. I should have said, life is fundamentally precarious. We all live in fragile bodies that could be harmed just walking down the street, or we could catch a disease, or all kinds of things. So life is precarious. But what neoliberalism has done is heaped on additional precarity on people's lives, because we have so much wealth in the world, so much talent, so much skill, so much science in the world, and yet it falls very unevenly in the population, and we make some people extra precarious because of how neoliberalism answers questions and creates tremendous winners and terrible losers. So as I said, the world is weary of neoliberal answers, and I think care theory suggests that we need solutions that place a commitment to care at the forefront, both a physical one and an emotional one. And that's it for me.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much for the amazing presentation. I would now request Ms. Vasudha Savekar to please begin with the Q&A session.
Thank you, Professor Maurice, for that wonderful lecture. The question and discussion session is now open. You can type your questions either in the chat box or raise your hand. One follow-up question is allowed for each question. If your questions have not been taken up, you can correspond with the speaker through email. Yeah. All the questions are being recorded. I'm having a little bit of a trouble with the chat box. Are there questions in the chat box? Okay, so I'll just read out the question from Maitei Fen. Metaphysics and caring Is caring fundamental to human nature, or is it an ethical imperative, something we ought to do? Theater as epistemology, not just about skill acquisition. I'm especially interested in your dramaturgical method to understand it.
All right. I'll just go ahead and answer, right? Yeah. So thank you. Thank you for the question, Matai. So one of the things about care is it's a very, in a sense, I sometimes talk about care theory as being postmodern. And what I mean by that is that it doesn't rely a lot of times on traditional categories, and it cuts across categories. So your first question is, metaphysics and caring, is caring fundamental to human nature, or is it an ethical imperative, something we ought to do? And in this case, it is both. So I would say that we all have the capacity to care. Care is something that we need. So it is fundamental to human survival. And it's an ethical imperative because we can always do better at it. We can care for more people. We can care for people, deeper. So, so that's my answer to that. And as I said, a lot of times, care violates some of the classic binaries in Western philosophy. So the is and the ought are are traversed. The means and ends are sometimes together. So it's not something that's easily put into a category. Sometimes just the act of being listened to, which is a way of gaining information in order to care better, sometimes just the act of listening makes the person feel cared for. So again, means and ends are kind of traversed in that sense. Your second question was theater as epistemology, not just about skill acquisition. I'm especially interested in your dramaturgical method to understanding. That is what we often do to train people to care. But for most people, it's about behavior. You have used drama as an epistemological approach of understanding through acting. Yeah, so you're right. People do role playing and those kinds of things to practice certain kinds of behaviors. But if we take philosophy seriously, we can also take that opportunity to reflect on what's going on, not just the behaviors, but what was the phenomenon? What was the what were the moral actions? What were the feelings involved? I wrote a couple of articles about that class I taught that I told you about on phenomenology of caring, and the class would these were not drama students, so they were very uncomfortable acting in front. So we worked our way up slowly, starting with just some meditation at first and some exercises, just being aware of our body, and then we worked our way up. Toward the end of the class, the class would meet twice a week, and one day we would do exercises, and the other day we would do readings and discuss together. But we would do these exercises, and they would be interactions with people that we had people could imagine, and then we would take a step back and ask what's going on here, and how was care involved in this interaction? How did it feel when the person was uncaring? How did it feel? And how could that have improved? What kind of inquiry could have made this better? What kind of response? And so, you're doing some of that reflective work at the same time, not just about the behavior, not just about the physical, but you go deeper in trying to understand that. Okay, where should I take the next question from?
From the raised hands, Professor Pius Thomas.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'll ask. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Maurice, for your very enlightening, interesting lecture. And the kind of scheme of thought that you presented. Am I audible?
Yes, I'm listening. I'm taking notes. Go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you. So the kind of scheme of thought that you presented, Merleau-Ponty's embodiment and the shared embodiment, care ethics, feminist care ethics, and empathy as imagination. I think this scheme, I think that it will take us to further. I do not know. You have to tell me, to a theory of, say, community. For example, we have a lot of theorists like Jean-Luc Nancy, Agamben, then Esposito. I think it can be taken to make it more meaningfully to a theory of community coming together. Of course, we have thinkers from other traditions also, people like Habermas or Paul Ricoeur, even Husserl, you can bring it to that tradition. But I'm thinking parallel to that, there is a concept of philosophy of disembodied consciousness. For example, in India, we have perhaps not very good example of this Advaita Vedanta and consciousness studies. And I think that in this kind of disembodied consciousness studies, care dimension is absolutely lacking. That's why, of course, there is a question of, they always support, historically also, untouchability and a kind of, lack of sense of community. And this dichotomy is a very important dichotomy, I think. How do you respond to this? Because without having a sense of community, we cannot complete the idea of embodiment, shared embodiment, and care. Secondly, with a concept of consciousness which is disembodied, there is no concept of community, and there is no concept of care. This is my kind of thought that was coming to my mind when I heard this. I heard your talk. Would you like to comment on this? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Beautiful question, beautiful comments. Well said. I completely agree. I want it to eventually be a theory of community, and I think you're absolutely right. Care has the potential for that. And the reason I start and dwell on the fact that all humans need care, everybody, it doesn't matter your political affiliation. It doesn't, matter your lot in life. Everybody needs care. And so everybody has some inkling or understanding of care. Now, for some people, it's been really oppressed or depressed, and so it's been truncated, but everybody has care. And so if we have any hope of building a community across difference, I think it's got to be located in care, and we need to find. I think because each of it knows something of it, each of us has something of it. There's the real potential that if we can just help people see or expand and make that connection, that we can have a theory of community. And I believe you're absolutely right. We desperately need that. And it's something I'm trying to get at with this ethos of care. What if our narratives in society were the immediate response was the caring one? Well, how does that decision, affect people? How does that actually affect the people's lives and and so forth? And the answers aren't easy. They're very difficult kinds of questions. I heard somebody on the news yesterday, talking about they're going to raise interest rates in the United States, and it's going to create more unemployment, but they think it's acceptable unemployment if they can get the inflation down. And then somebody pointed out, well, it's acceptable unemployment, except to those people who are thrown out of their jobs, except for those people. So I think care does have the potential to be a theory of community. And then I can do nothing but agree with your second comment about disembodied consciousness. We just have to get out of that. We are not just minds, we're people too. And I think maybe the pandemic has given us another opportunity to be reminded of that, the body needs to be cared for, and it needs, we need to think more holistically in terms of philosophy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
Ma'am Kanchana had her hand raised. So ma'am, could you ask the question?
Yeah, thanks so much. I did put my question on the chat box, actually. This is an excellent talk. Thank you so much. And especially for connecting phenomenology with care ethics, and particularly the dimension of embodiment, something I learned from your work all the time. And today, your articulation of this ethos is a way of going beyond legalism that we are so obsessed with in the liberal context. So thank you so much to think about. But there were just a couple of quick points, and one I'm following up on a question that's already there in the chat box by Raj Karyam about reversibility. Is it possible to foreground reversibility to this extent in the caring encounter? Because several times we find that it is not reversible. So a mother caring for a child or a nurse caring for a patient, they can't do the same thing back very often, but the care exists. And it seems to me that reversibility tends to reproduce the liberal model of quid pro quo, and I see this to some extent even in Merleau-Ponty, this idea of touching and being touched, because when it comes to something like disability, as that whole Schneider example problematic in Merleau-Ponty illustrates, we don't really have that constant give and take, even in the perceptual context when it comes to interacting with others. So can we think beyond reversibility, or how would you redefine reversibility?
Very good. Well, I can tell, from the questions that Kanchana is a sharp feminist care ethicist, because she knows that some of the existing criticisms, and you're right on the mark here. And Merleau-Ponty's work has been criticized on these grounds, and I don't think I don't think there's any really defending it. He definitely had some blind spots in his approach, and I should very quickly say that he was not a care ethicist. I was just I'm just taking his ideas and applying it to care ethics. He would have no concept of what care ethics was, and many feminists have been rightly critical. I think the reversibility thesis is not a reversibility of positions, but a reversibility of it's kind of a conceptual idea of how we our flesh and our habits of empathy can give us the opportunity to understand, to reverse and understand other people's positions. And that's this idea of identity within difference. And so you're right. If it was strictly speaking, an equal kind of reversibility, then it would be just like a liberal model. But I think it's mostly a conceptual model. And again, you're correct about this. The Merleau-Ponty's model of touching and being touched seems to ignore disability. And that's exactly right. What the able-bodied can do, though, is they can do work to try to understand those who are differently abled. And that will never be perfect, but it's something that can feed the habit of empathetic imagination. So, for example, there was a program where hospital interns were asked to spend a day in a wheelchair, for example. And they learned so much about how people treat people in wheelchairs, about how people don't and do make eye contact with people in wheelchairs. They got a kind of an embodied sense of that. And there was in Belgium for a while it might still exist. I'm always unclear whether it's running because I haven't been able to make good contact with them, but there was a care ethics laboratory where teams from different health facilities would go and take turns being somebody who was differently abled and being treated versus being the person delivering the treatment. And they would, again, kind of do this role play, and they would act to try to understand it better. And so you're right. There is the Merleau-Ponty source material is indeed limited. I'm just hoping to draw upon his more general points. But thank you for the question. Good critique.
Yeah, indeed, that was interesting. That discussion was really interesting to hear, sir. The next question is, there is a hand raised by Karan Sharma. Could we take that question?
Sure.
Yeah, Karan?
Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, hello. I'm Karan from Department of Humanities, BITS, Goa. It's like just 20 miles away from Goa University. So presently I'm doing a research on how regimes of morality discipline human sexuality, and especially queer sexuality. And this question has been, in a way, one can say, informed by Nietzsche's critique of morality. And while listening to this lecture on care ethics, because this is something very new for me, it raises the question also Nietzsche raises regarding morality, and regarding morality, which has a very secular origin. And my question, or rather one can say my concern regarding care ethics is that, don't you think that care ethics, or the way it's theorizing is happening throughout the disciplines, say in political science or in sociology or women and gender studies, in these disciplines, there is a tendency, or perhaps there is a possibility, that it would itself become a form of a new form of secular morality, like it would there's a possibility that it would evolve as a moral preaching that thou shalt care, a new norm per se. So this is one concern I have regarding how do we, because obviously I understand the yearning or the concern with which care ethics comes to, but the critique here is that how is it different from, say, a religious morality or a regime of morality which has been pre-existing, which talks about care? How is this care ethics, which is informed by Merleau-Ponty's philosophy, different? How is it not a regime of morality? And secondly,
Karan, if I can stop you, we have a slight limitation of time.
Just one.
So
Sure. That's enough.
Okay, very good. Actually, in my mind, I already heard 2 questions, but anyway, thank you for those questions. Those are excellent questions. And I should say that care ethicists have been criticized by many. The early care ethicists, remember this field is only, 40 years old. So it's still very new, comparatively speaking. But early care ethicists have been criticized as being heteronormative. And so there's a new crop, it's very exciting. There's a new crop of young care theorists who are pushing the envelope and thinking about issues of sexuality and not over-privileging, for example, the parent-child relationship. And I recommend that you think about getting Trans Care by Hill Malatino, and because they are addressing some of these issues. And for example, I know of a special issue of a journal coming out in philosophy that's going to be called Care Otherwise, and it's all dedicated to people about to scholars thinking about care in non-traditional ways, non-heteronormative kinds of way. To your second point about the tendency to become a secular morality, it's great that you brought that question up, because I just finished editing a book called Care Ethics, Religion, and Spiritual Traditions, which should come out later this year on Peters in Belgium. And I just finished writing a chapter for the book I'm writing on religion and care ethics. And I think the difference is between this and versus a kind of religious morality is if you take the notion of it being a process morality seriously. And what I mean by that is, okay, it's got this moral ideal, guilty as charged. It's going to be, yes, we should care, but the manifestation of it is open and not predetermined. And so my argument in the book is that, in fact, care ethics is actually agnostic about your religious beliefs, because you're right. There are care prescriptions in religions, and that's great. That's a starting point. But there's also practices that are very uncaring by religious institutions. And so it's not so much that I think care theory, kind of cares about your religious preference, but that care needs to be primary. It needs to be the categorical commitment. There's a primacy of care. And when religion goes with it, that's great. When religion opposes care for people, then I invite people to question that, whether it's important. So yes, it's a kind of secular morality, but it's its open-endedness, its lack of prescription. I don't know. This is the first time I've met you. I have no idea how to care for you. I can't know that, without getting to know you in your particular situation. And so everybody needs care, but it needs to be contextualized. It can't be one size fits all. And that's where I think the difference is. I think in a lot of your moralizing, there's this kind of sense of, I've got the answer for you, here's your answer. And I don't think care theorists have the answer, but they want to help you get to caring. And by the way, as you're doing your research, again, I'm very interested in like what you're thinking about. And if you want to contact me by email, you are quite welcome to do so. But thank you for the question.
There are quite a few questions, Professor, in the chat box. I think we'll take up two more before we wind up. So Raj Karia's question, we answered the first part, is there a reversibility in care ethics? But the second part I think remains. Is it the case of care is similar to altruism, or is it one's duty to care? And if you can answer subsequently, the next question also. My question is regarding, yes, my question, this is by Amit Hatia Gadi. I'm sorry if I pronounced it wrongly. Thank you so much for the brilliant lecture. My question is regarding the role that care ethics will play in future with respect to artificial intelligence, as technology will be at the center and humans might be sidelined. So then does care exist? Yeah, so those two questions, I think.
Okay, great. Well, these are again, excellent questions. I can tell this is a very smart audience. These are wonderful questions. So Raj, to the question of is it the case that care is similar to altruism, or is one duty to care? Those are really two different questions and two very big topics, and one that's in quite a bit of discussion in the literature. I would argue that care is not altruism, that you always have to balance care with self-care. And so the individual has to be in the mix. And so I've consistently written that care is not the same as altruism. That was one of the early worries. Some feminists were concerned about care ethics when it was first theorized about, because they thought, oh, you know, women have had to do all this care labor, and they've been, you know, burdened by it and limited by it, and now care ethics is just going to push that even further. And I don't think that's true. If you're gonna commit to care, you also have to commit to caring for yourself. And so I don't think it's altruism. And then, does one have a duty to care? Again, there's been some really good work written on this. I'm thinking of Sarah Clark Miller and others. And if you, by the way, Raj, if you want to contact me and talk about this further, I can. But the reason I don't like to argue, the reason I like the word commitment versus duty is because duty sounds like it's imposed from the outside. And I think care is most actuated, most realized when it's a commitment from in. When we realize that care is so important in the world that we need to foment more care. That's why I like the word commitment. Joan Tronto talks about responsibilities to care and how responsibilities are divided up. So the political theorists have written a lot about this. And some do argue that there is a duty to care. And I'm not opposed to the concept, but I just don't like the idea of an external imposition. I'd rather think about it as an internal commitment. And then Amit, oh yeah, so the artificial intelligence one is a very active discussion, you know, about this. And as I said, I just was working with this one author who was thinking about it in terms of their dissertation. And I think this is where we need care to push back against neoliberal answers. So when when I went to Stanford to this kind of big meeting on artificial intelligence, there were a lot of vendors who had developed technology to quote unquote care for people, like bots that could do therapy, or robots that could carry people from place to place, and those kinds of things. And I think we have to be really careful about what we describe as caring and what we describe as tools for care. And it is very possible that artificial intelligence and new technologies can be tools of care, but it is my belief that only humans can care, and we don't want to let the marketplace dictate what care is. Let's face it. I mean, there's been some good writing on this too. Care has been completely commercialized. Everybody says they care. All the advertisements say they care. ExxonMobil says that they care. And I think that people will try to sell things that say provide better care. They'll use that word, but I think we have to be very, very suspicious of that, and we need to push back. And that's why I don't want the marketplace to drive that. I think AI can be a wonderful tool to advance our ability to care for others, but I would definitely not describe it as as care in and of itself. But it's a fascinating subject. Just to tease this a little bit, one of the questions that's been brought up is, should we care about AI? Because some people have been abusive to technologies that have taken on particular identities. For example, AI that takes on a female voice, like Apple's Siri does. Some people have been abusive to it, and people are asking, should we care that people are being abusive to AI because of that kind of human identity that it's been given to? So it's just a fascinating subject, but we're going to have to kind of sort that one out. Thank you for the question, though. It's a big topic.
Thank you so much, sir.
Professor, we have 3 minutes more. Would you like to take another question?
Sure.
Yes. The question by, I think this would be our last question. Gheshna, thank you so much, Professor Maurice, for this amazing presentation and sharing your thoughts. This has brought up a lot for me. I'm sitting with so many thoughts, wanting to share this here as we are thinking about ethics of care. I think who we are as we are asking these questions is so important. Why, what you are saying, situatedness. Because as a trans person, I know the importance of care. I have witnessed and experienced deep care from trans women friends of mine. I'd say all of humanity has a lot to learn about care from queer trans communities, from the communities of drug users and disabled communities, etc. Questions I'm sitting with right now: who is able to afford to not think of care? Because it is given for so many due to institutional validation, usually upper caste, cishet, able-bodied privileges that some of us hold. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Gishna, for that question. It's a great way to kind of end the talk. And you're absolutely right. I started with my concern about privilege in the land acknowledgement that I was given. And yes, one of the things that we do when that some people do when they gain privilege, when they gain power, when they get money, is they're able to turn off some of those emotional attachments and not have to care. They can create others in people, and the privilege isn't always just financial; it can be in other kinds of ways, and that's something that we need to work assiduously to try to diffuse. And we live in a very separated world where people of means can remove themselves from those. And so you're right. I mean, care is this wonderful, I mean, I talked about the care aesthetic. Care can be a beautiful thing, but care can also be a taxing thing. It can be an emotional burden. It can be difficult. It can be messy. And so some people are able to tell stories to themselves and to locate themselves in ways where they don't have to care for other people. And that's where we need to reignite their commitment to care, the spirit of care, so that that doesn't become too much of an influential narrative. But you've put your finger on an enormous problem in today's world, and that's why I'm so concerned about neoliberalism, because I think neoliberalism offers us one of those narratives to be able to afford not to care for other people. So anyway, great question. Thank you. I hope you work on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Maurice, for answering those questions. Anyone whose questions are left unanswered, please write to Professor Maurice. The email ID of Professor Maurice is there in the chat box. Over to you, Akash.
Thank you very much, Vasudha. Yes. Thank you very much, Vasudha. Thank you very much, Sir Maurice, for amazing question answer session. I would now request Ms. Sia Sangborkar to give the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Akash. Good evening, everyone. It gives me immense pleasure to propose the vote of thanks on behalf of the School of Sanskrit, Philosophy and Indic Studies at Goa University. I would like to thank Dr. Maurice Hamington for the very, very interesting and thought-provoking talk. I would also like to thank Dr. Koshi Tarakan, Dean and Head of our school, and all other faculty members of the school, Dr. Sanjot, Dr. Walter, and Ms. Rajvi. I would like to extend my gratitude to all the research scholars at Goa University, all participants, faculty, students, and others from and outside Goa University, and also to all those who helped with the poster design and event promotion. Thank you so much. Thank you. Over to you, Akash.
Before
Thank you, Sia.
we conclude, let me, on behalf of all the faculty members and students of the School of Sanskrit, Philosophy and Indic Studies, place on record our deep sense of gratitude to you, Professor Maurice, for such a wonderful talk. And also I wish to place on record our sense of indebtedness to all the audience. I mean, there were people from other parts of India. So let me once again thank you all for being part of this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Just to inform everyone, the recording of the lecture will be posted on our school's YouTube channel, Philosophy at Goa University on YouTube. And we will be back with a new guest lecture next semester, online guest lecture. Next month, it will be the 12th guest lecture. Thank you everyone for coming. Please join us again in the next month.
Thank you, everybody. It was wonderful. It was quite an honor. I really appreciate it.